Recording begins. This is October 17th. This is ESM 105, and the year is 2025. And here we are talking about biodiversity, Tasmanian devil insurance populations. Okay, so we were talking about some in situ, bless you. Is that a bless you situation? I don't think so. We're talking about in situ and ex situ conservation efforts. We're talking right now about species-focused conservation efforts, all right, versus habitat-focused conservation. And we ended discussing translocations and why you might be moving a bunch of animals around, basically, okay? Went through some examples of supplementing a small population, setting up what we call an insurance population, where there's a small population, it's at threat, so you move it to another area where you can keep it safe and then hopefully reintroduce the species back to its natural habitat. The end goal of these efforts is usually reintroduce them, put them back in the area. You got reducing overpopulation without culling individuals. Great. And this is a kind of a cool one, actually. Reintroducing a species to a formal range. Somebody asked a question sort of about this on Wednesday, where you might have had a species that used to be in a given area. It's no longer there, so you take them from a large population and you move a subset into the area where they used to exist. Hopefully they fulfill their role in the ecosystem again, they fit back into it, and there you go. Tasmanian devil insurance population, so there's this terrible disease called devil facial tumor disease, all right, which spread pretty rapidly through the living Tasmanian devil population because they'd gone through a number of, genetic drift events, really, including a founder effect issue, where a small population that was established the now current population, and then some bottlenecking events happened, which just randomly reduced genetic diversity. And so if a disease works in one individual, it's more likely to work in or be able to spread to closely related individuals. So you had a low genetic diversity population here, and this disease spread through and became a problem. They're very cute animals. Okay. Yeah. Look at how big the mouth is. It's wild relative to the body. Yeah. It's it's a bear rat cat. Yeah. Oh, it would. Oh, I love it. I love this picture. I love this animal. I hate that they're suffering from this terrible disease. That's a good one too. They're all mouth. Yeah. They just look like they are. I mean, look at the way the ears are, like horns and everything. I mean, they're carnivorous. They're absolutely, you can guarantee. Yeah.
Is it like a bobcat or like a mountain lion? It's gonna just like attack you? I think bobcats and mountain lions attack you for no reason anyway. Well, they don't, but I guess that was just like the common thought of they're pretty cat. They're like smaller than a bobcat.
These are pretty compact creatures. Yeah.
They're like kind of like a badger in ferocity, but yeah. Are people also scared of badgers?
Yeah. People are scared of carnivores.
Whatever you want. Big girl.
You can.
No, I just mean is it stereotyped that these animals attack people? Yeah.
Yes.
In the same way that wasps attack people, for reasons, their own reasons.
Yeah.
Tasmanian devil brain.
Yeah. And these genetic drift, these bottlenecking events weren't necessarily because people were like, we have to get rid of these evil animals. It was more just, they habitat destruction and everything gets removed. A lot of random, like, okay, all the Tasmanian devils that are here die.
I wasn't thinking that. I just more wanted to know if it's gonna
Totally.
I'm gonna be like, hi.
I don't think you should pet one if Yeah. But hey, they're also the only living marsupial or the largest living marsupial carnivore. That's kind of cool. All right. They're marsupials, which is weird. Yeah, I got a pouch somewhere. Yeah, I love them. They're really neat. Uh,
Oh yeah, that's what I.
yep, they're like mammals. They seep.
I actually didn't know this. And they're omnivorous and they eat ticks and they're named their babies.
They're really cool. They really are super neat. And in that pouch is like a weird little mat of pores that seep milk. They don't have nipples, so you just seep milk into their fur, and then their offspring like lick it out. It's really weird.
That I did not know that.
It's cool. They're really marsupials are wild. Yeah,
Do they just get like soaked in milk then?
yeah, yeah. It's yeah. And it is a foul place inside of a pouch.
Cheese pouch.
Yeah, they're full. Oh man, like they're all full of like mucus too and stuff, and it's really
Secondary pool.
yeah. It's wild. I love it. It's really cool.
The misconception of them like curing diseases comes from?
You know, that's a great question. I know that diseases can occur inside the pouches, but also there's a whole microbiological community inside of marsupial pouches that live on all the goo in there. And if that's in balance, oh yeah, like oh they all get diseases in their pouches when we keep reaching our hands in there. Yeah, who'd have thunk it? Yeah. You don't have to wash your hands. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So, in order to prevent the rampant or reduce the, well, not really to reduce the spread of this, instead of trying to control the spread of this disease, an additional effort to conserve the species was conducted where they relocated a bunch of Tasmanian devils. All right. And they created, they'll use the terminology all the time in conservation of like an ark. They make an ark where they put them, they are kept safe, it's in a new environment. Either this is a very controlled environment, or this is an environment where the disease is not present. And they take efforts to prevent movement of individuals that are infected into that environment. And this is low on the desirability hierarchy for a conservation effort, but it maintains a gene pool of the individuals. Awesome. Additional ways to manage species. All right, so these are still, would be a good in situ conservation effort. An example of an in situ conservation effort: supplemental feeding. Okay, you move carcasses so that I was gonna look up because last time I couldn't remember the term for the animals that specialize in eating carcasses, and I still can't. So supplemental feeding practices can be conducted where you put food into the area to feed the species. Now, it's, huh? That works. That's not the tridivores. That's like dead plant matter. Yeah.
That's the worm.
Gosh darn it. We got it. I can't live my life. I can't go another day not knowing this. Name for species that specialize in feeding on carcasses. Carrionivore, scavenger is what I'm getting here. I don't want that one. There's another word.
It is wrong, but it's more of an umbrella term.
Yeah, exactly. Scavenger is the umbrella term, and I want the dang.
Look at the Wikipedia. I remember the AI overview.
I love the AI overview. It has all the information. Etymology, related terminology. Detritivores, very good. Detritus. Necrophage. There's a word for this that is commonly used, and it's gonna make me lose my dang mind. That's okay. I'll look it up in a textbook, and I'll figure it out.
But how can Google not tell us?
I know.
It seems like a simple enough question.
It's a very simple question.
Go to the library together.
Yeah. Let's get everybody knows their Dewey Decimal System. Let's open up the card catalogs and find it. All right. So supplemental feeding. It's a simple enough concept. They're hungry, put some food out there. This is a really standard part, though, of a reintroduction plan or like a rewilding plan, where you introduce the species. They're going to have to get used to acquiring their own food, and so you might do a supplemental feeding program so that they have readily available food. Okay, this really gets into the idea of habituation, which is something that you're trying to avoid. Because if animals become habituated to being fed or human interactions, it doesn't really serve them once they get reintroduced into the wild. All right, so it's usually a short-term solution. You want to phase it out, but if you're reintroducing some individuals and you're waiting for the system to kind of come into balance and you're waiting for them, those individuals that you've reintroduced, to relearn how to acquire their own food, supplemental feeding might be conducted. All right? So if you put stuff into a bird feeder, you're doing a supplemental feeding thing. Okay. What problems do we get with supplemental feeding? Pretty intuitive stuff. You've got the behavior patterns get altered, you become dependent on human-provided food, habituation to human contact, where these animals should probably be avoiding humans, okay? Species compete for that the supplemental food that you provide, so it can be both intra-specific and inter-specific, that competition. You put a big pile of meat out there, and now a lot of animals are competing for it. And you're also creating sites where individuals aggregate, okay? And if the individuals are reaching a high density, if you remember our discussion of density-dependent and density-independent population regulation, okay, then density-dependent regulation, one of the mechanisms for that is disease. So if you reach a high density, based on that whole framework, it's more likely that you can have diseases, all right? And then you're putting food out there, you're putting an energy source out there, and you might accidentally feed some pests, all right, which is just a term for the things we don't want there. Okay, oh my gosh. I took my vulture example from a now defunct course that I used to teach on applied ecology, where I assigned this really cool article called about diclofenac poisoning, which was interesting. Okay, there's this antibiotic that they were feeding to pasture animals, all right, to cattle, okay, and then the cattle would die, and vultures would come and eat them, and they would bioaccumulate this antibiotic, okay, and the vultures were getting sick from the concentrations of this diclofenac. Okay, so one method that they tried to use to reduce diclofenac poisoning was feeding them non-contaminated or non-treated meat. It's a really interesting article, actually, where the researchers, I'd go out on a limb and say that they were intentionally dishonest with their data. There was this weird outlier of one vulture that died from a certain treatment, and that vulture threw the entire analysis off, where it said that diclofenac was more deadly than it actually was to the vultures. I actually went far enough to get the original data set and remove that outlier and test if it was an outlier, and it was like, yeah, these results were actually inconclusive. There was definitely evidence to support that this was a problem in the ecosystem, but their data did not demonstrate it if they were using honest statistical methods. So it's pretty interesting. I liked that article a lot back when I taught this course. But here's the thing, okay? You want the animals to be eating something that's not contaminated, so you provide the same food supply, but free of the contamination or the poison. All right? It's pretty cool. All right, culling. Culling sounds, it's a nice way of saying you're gonna go out and you're just gonna kill some animals. All right, you're removing individuals from the population. All right, but calling it culling definitely makes it feel a little less aggressive. Okay. Really, they do a lot of culling. Can we get fun? Not fun. Can we get an example from you?
Like killing off half of the dairy because they aren't making enough profit.
Oh.
And then with their like revitalization process and getting us back to the same amount of numbers that we started with. So it was
Wow.
for nothing.
Yeah. Is this at like Cal Poly Pomona or?
For profit, and then it doesn't work.
Well, it was calling for profit because they were like, we're gonna make the program smaller to save us money.
Oh, you shrink the dairy program by. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So.
they just sold them all for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
For
Well,
150 cows.
speaking of culling for profit, actually, so that's a slightly different thing, right? Where you don't want to have the program be the same size, so you kill the dairy cows and you ship them off for meat. Wild. All right. Another conservation method of culling that also generates profit is issuing like hunting permits. All right. So hunting permits are an example of in situ conservation efforts that involve culling. And you can justify these cullings as, well, there's no longer a predator here. The predator was removed, and now the herbivore population is too large. If the herbivore population gets too large, then it consumes too many of the plants. It drives itself towards this nutrient scarce thing. It throws the whole system off, right? Also, you can get diseases that spread through. So if that population is no longer under the control or under the limiting factor of a predator, then you issue hunting permits, and people take on that role as the predator and so remove the individuals. Yeah.
Is that like what Green Diamond does with the barred owl?
Is that what they do?
I think it's a barred owl.
Because the barred owl is,
He's the species with the northern spotted.
I think it's either the northern spotted, the northern spotted and another nesting. There's another bird that nests in the same habitats that's also endangered that competes. But yeah, that's a great example. Are they still doing that project program where they remove those owls?
A couple years ago in environmental science class I took, my teacher had like friends that were in Green Diamond, that worked for Green Diamond.
Yeah.
Said that they were doing that.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean, that's exactly an example of a culling project, right? You've got non-endangered species that are competing for habitat with endangered species or competing for other resources. So you allow removal of those species. Removal's a nice way of saying it, you know? Hunting permits, right? When we think about them, we usually think of fishing licenses and, I don't know if they're the same as me, but deer, you know? Because deer tend to be a problem because we've removed all of their predators, all right? But there's also some examples, and I mentioned something about this on Wednesday, I believe, of like trophy hunting licenses. And when you're doing the conservation guided trophy hunting licenses, they will give permits to hunt specific individuals that have passed reproductive age, but are still competing for resources with the reproductive individuals. That's the justification of this, is that, remember our curve, our logistic population growth curve? All right, the population reaches a carrying capacity. If you want a population to be expanding, you want it to be around here, all right? And it's in the size of the population. Because you want to be maximizing the slope of this line. So if the population is near its carrying capacity, all right, you want to reduce the number of individuals so that the population will grow more rapidly. And non-reproductive individuals are not contributing to the next generation, so you can give licenses to remove them. All right? And if these are endangered species, then people will be excited to be able to go and hunt them. And so it's a whole, industry for that. It's not an industry, but these, I guess it is. Anyway, culling efforts. Very cool. I mean, not very cool. De-extinction, okay? Another sort of species-based conservation effort. We had some questions earlier on about, hey, restoring mammoths and doing this, right? De-extinction can take a few different forms. Sometimes it actually involves genetic engineering, where you take genes of extinct species and you insert them into extant species, right? Sometimes it involves taking an extant population, okay, and breeding them to for the characteristics that the extinct species had. And the idea is, right, that there was a common ancestor. This has to do with our whole phylogeny discussion, our very brief phylogeny discussion, all right? There was a common ancestor here. This species went extinct, but these species are extant. They are currently alive. So what you do is using records of the morphology of the extinct species, you breed these individuals, A and B, all right, for the characteristics that this species had. They should have some of the same genetics. They may have some of those genes may have been silenced over time. They may still be there in the genome, or some individuals may be expressing more characteristics. So that's like a selective breeding sort of situation that you see on the left here, where you just breed a bunch of living individuals that were closely related, but select for the extinct individual's characteristics. So you're trying to de-extinct the species. All right? Awesome. That's the final slide of our species-based conservation topic. Now we move into landscape ecology and habitat conservation. Of course, the two are very closely tied together. You know, we've talked about how in order to conserve a species, to help a species out, maintaining its habitat is kind of necessary, usually, right? At least with the in situ. Okay, preservation versus conservation. We've talked about this before. I'm just putting it back up to make sure we're all still comfortable with the idea. Preservation, you preserve the landscape in the natural state. You limit human involvement. Conservation projects, you increase management. You actively manage the site. You actively manage the habitat. Okay, forests. All right. We're going to talk about boreal forests briefly because they are a very threatened sort of habitat type, okay? Because they've been traditionally less exploited, but technologies have allowed access to boreal forests in ways where it wasn't originally possible, okay? So we've got these boreal forests, which are way up here at high latitudes. They're pretty productive. It has to do with global circulation patterns of air, bringing moisture up to that area, providing enough moisture to allow for plant growth, okay, generating these forests. Yeah, what's a forest? A forest is at least 10% tree covered landscape. All right, pretty straightforward definition of forest right there. Wish that font size was a little bigger, but hey, you know, good. Forests. What's left of forests? What are the most abundant forests? Okay. Well, we've got boreal, we've got tropical forests. Those are hugely important, but you know that tropical forests are currently exploited, have been exploited in the past. Boreal forests have avoided being, fewer resources have been extracted from boreal forests historically. A lot of it has to do with accessibility, okay, to those habitat types. Proximity to human populations, the conditions, how consistently you can harvest and extract. Boreal forests. So, of the land that is forest land, so of the areas where at least 10% of the land is covered by trees, about 33% of the forested land is made up of the boreal forests. All right? Here they are, high latitude band, right up here, boreal forests. A lot of conifers and some birches. All right? It's beautiful. Look at that, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I don't know. I like a conifer. They're nice. They're good trees. I grew up with a lot of pines myself. I could do without them. They drop their needles all over. They got that sap. It gets on your car's windshield. It's unpleasant. So, I say get rid of them all, right? No pines anymore because I don't want to have to clean my windshield. We can all agree that that's where our values lie, is on John's windshield protection. Good. The paint. Oh, I didn't even think about the paint. Yeah, it ruins your car's paint job. Terrible. You know what? Yeah, all you go out there and harvest some boreal forest. It's just a JK. Yeah, well, just the pines. The spruces can stay. All right, cool. So here's another reason these boreal forests are important. All right. Reduce soil decomposition because there's this permafrost, which is going away kind of. But remember our carbon cycle discussion, right? How decomposition from the soil is a major contributing factor to carbon production, carbon gas production, right? You've got all of this organic matter that has sequestered carbon, and then dead matter falls to the ground, and then as it's decomposed, it releases CO2, methane, other carbon-containing gases that go into the atmosphere, contribute to the greenhouse effect. You want carbon to be sequestered to try to keep the carbon balance at a healthy level, all right? So in areas that have abundant plant growth but low soil temperature, you end up with a lot of organic matter in the soil. And that's beneficial if you're concerned about the carbon cycle. All right, so these are important habitats for the carbon cycle. The clicker, I don't have the receiver. Here we go. Yeah, so there's forest fires up there. Most of those forest fires are initiated due to lightning strikes. Okay, they tend to be less impacted by human activities because of where they are, really. Population densities are pretty low in the areas where the boreal fires occur. The boreal forests occur, yes?
You mentioned that technology has made them more accessible. How so?
Oh, yeah. So the rate at which trees can be harvested. So in the times when you can access these areas, yep, you can harvest the trees way more rapidly and way more effectively.
For some reason, I took that people started posting TikToks, and now people are
Oh, yeah. Everybody's talking about what I'm talking about with the sap. It's like everybody's like, yeah.
That makes more sense.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, these areas are now undergoing more logging. It's expanding pretty rapidly. Oil, gas extraction, it's expanding pretty rapidly. All of this undecomposed organic matter eventually becomes fossil fuels, right? So if decomposition rates are lower, have been lower historically in an area, then there's more likelihood that there will be these ancient pools of carbon in the soil, which have a lot of energy in them, which we can extract now. And with permafrost melting due to climate change, decomposition rates themselves increase in the area. It's a bad scene, all right? Fires are happening more. So the boreal forests are under threat. They are being reduced at an increasing rate. Good. Not good, but I think that the conveying that information went pretty well. All right. Old growth forests. All right. Old growth forests or primeval forests, which is a term that I ran into in prepping these PowerPoints. I was like, that's interesting. I'd actually never heard them called a primeval forest before. I've only heard of old growth and secondary growth, but that just speaks to the limitations in my own education, I would suppose, I would presume. Alrighty. So, old growth forests are forests that have never been harvested. That's basically the idea here. You could say, oh, it's a community that's been allowed to stay at the climax community stage for a long time, or that it's a community that's been free of, I got it on the slide, so I'm just going to use the language I put on the slide, free of industrial disturbance, all right? It hasn't been harvested from. The natural patterns of succession and disturbance have been proceeding uninterrupted or unmodified, right? So succession, 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 disturbance, succession, succession, disturbance. Some areas hit climax and maybe they become very stable and stay there. It doesn't mean that there's been no disturbances. It just means that these have followed the natural pattern of succession for a long time. Cool. Old growth forests. Forest harvest methods. All right. There are different ways that forests can be harvested, and forest harvest methods have a large impact on the stability of that forest. So regulations of how forests need to be harvested, that's really important, okay? We had an era of clear cutting, and while companies that were harvesting these trees, okay, were planting replacement trees because they want to harvest them later, there wasn't a lot of it wasn't done very effectively. And when you clear cut an area and then plant trees there, that's not how succession naturally progresses. There should have been other species there that foster the success of the trees that you plant. Yes.
Also been frequently replanting non-natives
Yeah.
or like imbalance native. Like around here, people replanted a lot of Douglas fir.
Oh yeah.
And Brantford took a huge amount of like succession stand, and now they're all like 40, 50 years old, and they're all dying at the same time.
100%. They planted a bunch of monocultures. They planted a bunch of non-native species in there because they were economically viable species. And timber companies view the forest as an agricultural field, essentially. So you harvest what was naturally there, and then you plant something there that's going to grow faster or produce higher quality wood, something that you can get out of there and sell again. Now, either thankfully or not thankfully, that system proved to be less than profitable because exactly what you said there. After monocultures were planted and after these non-native species were planted in these areas, those communities sort of collapsed. And when those communities collapsed, the trees weren't as healthy, the trees didn't grow right, they didn't get the harvest that they wanted. And so currently, many of those companies recognize that harvesting in a more sustainable way is beneficial for their bottom line, which is a terrible way that we have to get. It is the only way that a company motivated by profit and producing a wood product out of a forest is going to adjust their harvesting practice.
It's sad that everything in our life kind of follows that ideology.
It's incredibly depressing.
Shop local,
Yeah, there you go.
give things to your friends, be a villager.
I love it. Yeah.
I wish that would solve the problem.
It can if everyone
Not
does it.
completely, but yes.
That's how it starts.
I will tell you from my own research experience, I got into biochar research because I became really interested in carbon sequestration, and I thought that the carbon market would make biochar this huge thing where biochar production itself would be profitable. But my research took a sharp turn into attempting to show that incorporating biochar into the soil could reduce turfgrass irrigation requirements because of the turfgrass industry and how much water they use. And the idea was if they would adopt this and incorporate it into their soils at a certain rate, that would sequester X amount of carbon. But the entire thing had to come from, here's how much money you will save year to year on pesticide, herbicide, fertilizer, and water applications. And it's very pragmatic and will totally break you down and make you feel depressed because it's like the product itself has value because it's sequestering carbon. Can you just use it, please? But anyway, different methods of forest harvesting. Clear cutting, you know what it is. You cut everything until it's clear, okay? Shelter wood, you cut some trees, but you leave other trees that are going to shelter the new trees that you plant or the trees that you allow to grow up. Group selection, you select trees that are at different stages of development, and you remove other individuals. You leave groups of trees. This can be important for breeding them. Single tree selection, you'll select specific trees and remove the ones that are, you select specific trees. And there's a bunch of different criteria you can use for this. Either you're selecting the trees that are the best product trees, but then you have the question of now you're removing those genetics from the system, the genetics for the good high quality wood, you know? So anyway, here's some pictures of forest destruction in Brazil to bum you out. And yeah, there's different techniques for harvesting forests.
Is that due to them just continuing after 30 years of just like production, or like did they just massively change what they were doing? And, like,
Oh, what here in this?
yeah.
As a similar, it's clear cut.
Okay.
And these are all just, they have to make access roads
Yeah.
to get out there so you can see the network of how you move through the space. Yeah. Yep. So why do you deforest? Why do you kill? What's that from? That's from a movie, right? I think it's from The Island of Dr. Moreau, which everybody watched, right? Yeah, exactly. That happens in it. Conversion to agriculture. So one reason to deforest isn't even for the wood, okay? Or what you do is you clear cut, you harvest the wood resource, and then you convert the land into agriculture, okay? Now, agricultural systems have entirely different patterns of nutrient cycling, have entirely different patterns of carbon cycling, all right? Yeah, everything's gonna decompose pretty rapidly. You're gonna be tilling, you're gonna be fertilizing. It's a very managed system. So one of the biggest issues is you clear the forest to make land, to make pasture land, or to make land for growing crops. We'll talk about a little bit about palm oil production as an example of conversion of forests to agriculture. All right. Good deal. All right. Commercial logging, very good. You build roads to remove these trees, and that affects the forest as well, because now those logging roads are an access point. They're what landscape ecologists call a linear feature. And linear features in the landscape, those can be rivers, roads, wildlife corridors, okay? Anything that's like long and narrow, a linear feature. And linear features can serve as vectors for disease. They can be positive, connecting fragmented habitats together by making a habitat corridor of the same habitat type, a wildlife corridor. Green bridges, maybe you've seen them as they look like overpasses that just have trees planted on them, and they're meant to allow wildlife to walk over them. Okay. These are all examples of linear features. But linear features also, if they're cleared of forest, provide movement of humans. You get more people into the forest where originally they may not have had access, and that can affect the system. Also, I mentioned vectoring diseases. The very vehicles that move along these roads can pick up and transmit propagules in the mud they pick up in their tires. There's a lot of things to think about there. Huh? A propagule is anything that it's a unit of dispersal. Any unit of dispersal. So a seed, or for an algae, like some blobs of it, yeah. A propagule. Okay, I keep saying good stuff. I gotta stop saying that in this class because we're not talking about a lot of good stuff right now. A lot of fires, a lot of problems, a lot of reasons, deforestation issues. Biofuel production, okay? Here's something. So biofuel production is pretty darn, it's pretty darn interesting because you get things like, we're going to start using, you get these projects that are saying, we're going to start using ethanol, okay, as more of a fuel. We're going to supplement all gas with ethanol. And that means that we need to encourage people to grow crops that are used for producing ethanol. And then those crops now become more profitable, all right? And so you get farms for making corn, farms for making sugarcane, where they're never going to be sold as a food product. Instead, they're going to be converted into ethanol, which then is going to be added into gasoline. But then it makes converting land into this agricultural land, more tempting. All right? So oil palm plantations, all right? Palm oil, it's one of those things that, so you'll see labels that say, hey, palm oil free, there's no palm oil in this, because palm oil farming, it tends to be really destructive, really unsustainable, just really detrimental. I mean, look at the size of this massive palm oil farm right here. This is in Indonesia, okay? Look at this small little patch of natural forest, and then boom, 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 oil palms, all of that. This was a pretty recent figure I just found about what sources we've got for global biodiesel production. All right, and palm oil is a significant portion of this. There are new regulations. Look, I put it right here on the bullet point. The EU is committed to moving away from palm oil for biofuels by 2030, but an entire infrastructure has been built around using these for biofuels. And then there's questions also about the cleanliness of these biofuels. So for example, like adding ethanol into gasoline. There's some research to show that you have to use more gasoline, actually. You burn the gas faster when the ethanol has been added into it. So now you have a biofuel industry built around subsidies to add ethanol into gasoline, when that has not reduced gasoline consumption appreciably. And it ruins your car. And then all of these things about now you have to get a new car, because that's a huge environmental impact right there,
Like it's like a drastic shrink. It's like poison.
Yeah. No, it's a pretty good example of a failed project from start to finish, and a great example of industry capture of, well, now we've got an industry built around this, and you've got all this agricultural land dedicated to generating ethanol for purposes that aren't actually beneficial to anybody. It's a it's a bummer. It's a real freaking bummer, especially when it's all built around, it's all justified by alternative fuels,
Don't they kind of justify it like it's cleaner?
Yeah.
Is it actually?
Well, not as an additive to gasoline, right? Even though if you burn a gallon of gasoline, or a gallon of gasoline is 10% ethanol, yes, the gallon of gasoline that was 10% ethanol burned cleaner, all right? But it didn't produce the same amount of energy that was produced by burning this gallon of gasoline, and it couldn't be harvested as efficiently in the system that you're feeding it into. So you end up having to use 1.2 gallons of this modified gasoline to every 1 gallon of the non-modified gasoline, and overall, there's no net benefit. But it's easy to miss these things. Yeah. Have a good one. Oh yeah, we did hit our end of our time. Sorry, folks. Yeah. But no. It's really interesting stuff. But yeah, we got to wrap. We'll come back on Monday, and I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for watching the recording, and let's keep doing the thing we've been doing this semester. Yeah.